January 19th. We're holding this under Senate Bill 150, adopted by the General Assembly during the COVID. The meeting, I think, is being shown, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Pope, on both Cable 10 Live and on Facebook at this point.
Yes, sir. That is my understanding.
Okay. So with that, the meeting has been noticed. And with that, would you call the roll?
Member Hale?
Here.
Member Cuban?
Here.
Member Mason?
Here.
Member Snyder?
Here.
Member Dutton Mitchell?
Here.
We have a quorum. All members are present. Next item is consider approval of the minutes for the December 28th, 2020 special board meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes, and are there any questions or corrections? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are adopted. Next item is item 3.1. Consider accepting the financials for the month ending December 31st, 2020. And I assume, Mr. Denton, you also discuss our current status on past dues and cutoffs?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I'd like to go ahead and just start with that. I think that is pretty relevant considering where we are. As we all know, COVID has impacted business operations and also all of our customers in some way or another. I have with us tonight Cassie Estel, our customer service supervisor. Between the two of us can talk about where we are with customers, how it's impacted with COVID, and also just give you a little update, answer any questions you may have. Cassie, I'll go ahead and turn over to you to get started on just how we finished up December and where we are.
Hi there. Good evening, board members. Just a quick review in that basically with January, we started over with business as normal. So with December, we had approximately 5,000 calls we did for the month and 200 customers we helped curbside. And so far for the month of January, we have approximately 430 customers we've helped curbside and almost 4,000 calls already. So we have resumed business as normal. We will move forward through our cycles with their billing and non-pay processes as we did before. We have approximately 2,700 accounts on hold still, either through the default payment plans or through additional payment plans with our CSRs. And Bluegrass Community Action does still have funds. So we want to just encourage customers to still reaching out to them. They have funds through their crisis program still currently, and they will continue to take applications for that until they run out of funds. Everything else has ended, unfortunately. However, they do still have crisis funds available. So we would encourage people to continue to reach out to the local social agencies, and make applications to them if they're still in need of help, and just making people aware that we're here and our staff can help them over the phone, online, however they reach out to us to get them into a payment plan if that's what they need, as well as just business as normal. We're still helping everybody with their normal moves and things like that. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you all might have about where we're at with that or any of those numbers.
Well, I guess, Cassie, in relation to that, maybe, or you or David, what was our past due amount when we entered 1st of January, and where do we stand now?
When you say amount, Mr. Cuban, do you mean number of customers or accounts or dollar value?
Dollar values.
Okay, I would have to defer to Mr. Denton on that. I'm not sure if he has that. I would think for the end of December, he would have that. I don't know if we have any updates as to where we're at in January just yet.
You're right, Cassie. We know we look at it on a monthly basis. So I know from November, December, we saw a slight decrease, but around $3 million in past due. That's customers that were past due, carried a balance from one month to the next. So we'll have to finish out the 2 cycles in January to be able to give you updated numbers, but we'll have those for you, Mr. Cuban, in February's board meeting. But we did have a lot of activity in the first 2 weeks of this January. And so we also have a lot of customers that we've got up on those payment plans. When Cassie talks about on hold, those are payment plans for customers. So we feel like have moved in a good direction, and we feel like all the communications to customers that they've heard us on how we can help them, and also that we're resuming regular operations. So.
Does any board members have questions for David or Cassie? So at this point, we have, Cassie, could you reiterate again, how many people did we, by the time after people worked out plans and had people that didn't work out anything, didn't respond, and then unfortunately, we actually had to cut off?
Right now, the numbers that I have, Mr. Cubine, is we have 2,700 accounts approximately that have a payment plan of some sort in effect. That means they are making their payments as scheduled, or we've started them on a new one.
Okay,
That's the numbers that I currently have in front of me. The cycle 1 disconnections are scheduled for Thursday of this week. So we will have more numbers tomorrow and Thursday morning as to the number of customers impacted by that cycle that we're doing.
okay. Any other questions for Cassie or David? Okay, David, you want to give?
I just have
I'm sorry.
one question.
Sure.
We don't have any data on whether people that are being disconnected are in rental property or their own property, do we?
No, ma'am, that's not something that we would typically track in the system. We just have account numbers and type of services. So we track the services that have been turned off and restored, but not whether they're rental or own or not.
Okay, thank you. I didn't think so, but I was just curious.
Yes, ma'am.
So for the month in your board packet, I believe beginning on page 29 through 107, we have our regular monthly reports. This will be for the December of 2020 and on our financial activity income statement for the first 6 months of this fiscal year ending December 31st, 2020. I'd be glad to answer any questions the board may have. As you can see that we're on track with compared to our budgeted numbers. And I'd be glad to go any further and deeper that you may want to go.
Any questions of David? From your perspective, David, where we're at budget-wise and revenue-wise as opposed to budgeted, and so far we're having a mild winter. Where do you see us at this point, if you're going to make a projection at the 6-month mark, where do you see us ending the year?
I think that we're going to do better than expected. When you look at our telecom division, we did have a lot of customers throughout this year move to taking either higher speeds of our internet service or working from home and getting new service. So that was an increase and helpful to the telecom division, which is great because we are extending fiber to the home to customers. So we need those funds to build out that and bring benefits to the community. Water's stayed very steady. And even with electric, we're still better than expected. So I believe we have a lot of hope with hopefully things will get back to normal throughout this year. I believe we're going to finish better than expected on our budget to actual.
Okay. Is there any other questions regarding David on the financials and where we're at? Okay, seeing none with that, do we have a motion to accept the financial report for the period ending December 31st, 2020?
So move.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Financials are accepted. Item 3.2, adjustment of COO increase. I'll defer to Mr. Snyder on this.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back during the budget negotiations, we had a lot of back and forth about what kind of across-the-board pay increases we'd give to our employees. We decided to make it to where we did whatever increase we had in January, so we had a little better idea of where we were with COVID and everything else. And at the time, I made a motion to match the city's pay increase, the general across-the-board increase, up to 1.5%. And I made that motion consciously, thinking that the city would not go above 1.5%. Well, it turns out they did go above the 1.5%. They went to a total of 2.5%. So in order to keep pace with the city, since we are a creation of the city, I feel like it's proper, and I've talked a little bit with you about it. And so I'm going to propose that I'd like to make a motion to approve an additional 1% pay increase for all employees retroactive to January 1st, 2021, in order to equal that in order to equal the across the board raises given to city employees.
Okay, and that would also include our general manager contract, correct?
Yes. It would. And David is kind of weighed in on this. This it's not going to have that significant of a, especially with just being for a half year. It's within budget and does not require a budget amendment. Is that correct, David?
Yes, Mr. Snyder. Based on the way that we are tracking on our budget to actual with payroll, I believe there is sufficient room to cover that increase, and I wouldn't see a need for a budget amendment when we have money available. So.
Thank you. So I'd like to make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion on that? Because I think our intent when we passed the budget was, as John described, our intent was to give what city employees receive. And this is in fact consistent with what we adopted the budget, and all we're doing is just matching up the policy we adopted when we adopted the budget to what the city actually did. So if there's no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? Seeing no one opposed, the motion's adopted. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Number 4, informational item. Anyone signed up, or do we have any public comments, Kathy?
No, sir.
Okay. Next one. What about any website customer comments?
There was one, I believe it had to do with the loss of WDRB. If memory
Yes.
serves me. I don't have it in front of me, but I haven't had anything new since the budget board package went out.
Okay. Next is informational item, department reports. Vint, you want to give us the highlights?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Starting on page 111 through, I think it's 131, you'll see your standard departmental reports that we provide every month. And if you're okay, I will just touch base on 3 of our big projects and then answer any questions anyone might have. First of all, the Reservoir project. The telecom department has completed moving and setting up all the satellite dishes at their new location, and so they are operational, and that has gone well. We are working on getting the different pieces and parts together and the geotech done for the antenna tower that will be next to the satellite dishes. So that's moving along. As for the actual reservoir itself, at this board meeting, of course, the board in a few moments will consider approval of the construction plans that'll be suitable for bidding that. And so we're finalizing the specifications with those drawings and expect to take bids if the board approves over the next few weeks. So that project is actually starting to get rolling now. With fiber to the home, we have fiber construction crews that are working in the Indian Hills area, Ridgeview and Arnold Ridge. And the fiber splicing crews have been in the Meadows and Westwood Park. We are currently reviewing the fiber to the home engineering RFP responses. If you remember, we're trying to increase the speed as much as we can. So we need additional engineering help to be able to do that. So those RFP responses are being reviewed, and we expect that at the February board meeting, we will have a recommendation and suggested action for the board at that meeting. So those covers those 2 projects. The AMI project, the test system is currently in service, and the current focus of the project is building the integrations that we need between the AMI software and our in-house billing system. So assuming that all the testing goes well, we'll be moving to that initial field deployment of about 500 meters this spring. So that is moving along. Again, that's electric and water working with that. So again, those are kind of a quick status update of our 3 major projects that we have going on in each department. And then again, the normal detail is in your board package. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you all might have on that or your normal board package. And if not, I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Do any board members have any questions on any of the department reports for Vint to comment on, or anyone else to provide us information? Ms. Mitchell?
Sorry.
Sure.
On the customer service data that you provide in the report, is there a way in this to tell, or do you also track when, I guess sort of there's a customer, more of a customer complaint issue, or is that in a different report?
I would have to defer to Kathy or David Denton on the customer service report.
Yes, on the information you have in front of you on page 115, we don't keep a list of customer complaints. There's many different ways that customers can contact us. Of course, phone, and then we do have we do pay close attention to our social media pages, and also through our website, we have forms they can fill out. We do not have, we don't keep that on a monthly basis as far as customer complaints. If we did, though, I would like to also put the customer compliments on the other side of it as well. So we don't have that for you, but is there anything you would like to see in the future or that we can provide for you on that?
Well, maybe we could start kind of generally and see if we need to drill down to know more specifically what the complaint's about. And I don't know if you all already have some mechanism for categorizing the complaints. I mean, if you do, that would, any data that you've already have, if you could include that kind of data, that would be great.
David, could I ask you, between now and the next meeting, would you get with Ms. Mitchell and kind of look at some format and see what we've got? And if we're already collecting it, how to display it, or if we're not collecting it, how we can collect it for the future, and then we can bring that back in the next board meeting and show that format and the way that'll be displayed.
Okay, sounds great.
Is it okay with you, Catherine?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, sure. Steve? Steve?
My phone went off, so I kept to keep going. I think we need to collect that data, the complaint data, because that's going to educate us probably more about how to improve than the good one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that every specific detail needs to, be communicated, but it can give us the general direction as to where we need to improve if we actually collected and kept it.
Yeah, that way, and especially, the social media, I had an instance this week where I was made aware of something on social media, and it was one of the things where someone had a complaint, and I saw it and I forwarded it to Gary and Kathy Lindsay. And then, of course, what usually happens on social media is somebody makes a complaint, and then other people start chiming in, and then other things start popping out. So you kind of really get a flavor. And sometimes it's, people make complaints, and I know Cassie and the staff contact people and they say, have you ever called in a trouble call on it or whatever? And they say no, but they're still online telling people that there's a problem with our service, but we never knew it. I mean.
Well, I guess what the ones I'm thinking of, the ones that are officially made to the Frankfort Plan Board, I guess that could mean the Facebook page too,
Mm-hmm.
but where someone calls, writes, emails, maybe posts to the Plan Board site a complaint, I think we need to record and keep those to see, if there's a pattern for one, and obviously as a tool to improve.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I might add to your point about complaints on social media, that I have contacted Gary about some that I've seen, and
Mhm.
staff has thoroughly investigated
Yes.
and proactively reached out to the person who is not necessarily reaching back out to the plant board, but they're just on social media complaining. And I will say, often the complaints on social media maybe aren't exactly fairly
Mm-hmm.
described,
Right.
and or were taken care of, and or there was some other problem. On the other hand, I've known people that had a complaint and they chose to not go too far on the complaint because they didn't really want to, cause an employee
Right.
too much grief. But anyway, I do think we need to track that data.
Yeah.
And I can say, we have on the, I think getting together and figuring out exactly what the board would like to see would be great. We have on page 112 each month, the trouble call report, which kind of gives you an idea on the telecom side, what customers are calling in with trouble on. But when you're looking at different types of complaints, whether it be service or, employee related, we can surely get to some type of report and information that would help the board. So we'll get that together and come back around to you.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks for bringing that up, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions on any other department reports? Okay. Next item is, I think, the general manager information under those reports. Gary?
Yes. I will, I mean, is there any particular question or you would like to ask? And I would definitely happy to address it, or I can provide, future to study, provide those information to you.
I know Ms. Mitchell has something specifically she wanted to ask you to follow up on with the General Assembly currently in session. Catherine?
You're on mute.
Yeah.
Yes, Gary, I emailed you about it
Yes.
earlier today. And thank you for passing on the sort of the update on the tracking of the bills. And so one of the bills I was interested in is House Bill 159. It's also Senate Bill 109, and it's concerning fluoridation of water. And apparently, this kind of bill has been proposed before, but it's not gone anywhere. But I am interested in it. I know a little bit about the pros and cons of fluoridation in the water. But I really don't know. Not that the plant boards had an option in the past, because it's a statutory thing that we must fluoridate, I guess, to the level that the cabinet requires. This bill would give an option to opt out of it, if I'm reading it correctly. But I do know there's fluoride naturally in the water. I don't know what our water source, the river, has naturally. I don't know how much we have to add necessarily. I think I saw a number for what our fluoride level is, but I would like to know what the natural level is. I'm assuming we do have to add, and to what level do we add? And are we just meeting, or are we exceeding what the cabinet requires? I would like to know that. And if there's any other information, related to this topic, I would just like to be a little bit more informed. And, I don't know, honestly, what the Frankfort community thinks about it. But so I would like to kind of get some information, and just by this coming up at the meeting, let people know out there that I'm interested to know what they think.
Thank you. I
Julie,
appreciate that.
I saw Julie came on. Yeah, Julie, do you have some comments?
I have a David, David, and also, Julie can help me on that. Thank you.
Yes, we'll put some information for you and get it to you tomorrow morning. And I can give you some data and just some history on how Frankfort Plant Board's been handling fluoridation.
Julie, could you go on and when you provide the information to Catherine, would you mind go on and whatever type of report you do, go on and post that on our website so that people who are watching this would have that information?
I'll send it up the chain and let them make that decision.
Okay, is that okay with you, Catherine?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
Any other item? I'm sorry, Dawn?
Whether it's posted on the webpage or not, could you send the information to all the board?
Sure.
In addition to Catherine?
Yes.
Thank you.
Let me ask you, on that bill, which I agree with Catherine, looks like it lets you opt out of fluoridation. I guess I'd like to understand, I have a general idea, obviously, but what would be the impact if you opted out? I mean, what's the potential, and I'm being presumptuous. What's the potential on your health, on your dental health, if you opted out of fluoridating the water?
David, can you help us?
I'm going to defer to Julie on that. I do have a
Yes.
few comments about the bill itself. I know Louisville Water Company has expressed concern over some of the previous attempts, and it looks like the Kentucky-Tennessee Water Utility Council will be having some negative comments about the bill. And basically, from what I understand, is it would be very problematic for large utilities. Like we serve both Georgetown and have potential for serving Midway, another municipality. It would be quite problematic for us if one community wanted it and one community didn't.
Mhm.
So that is going to have to be something that's addressed. As far as some of the questions you asked about health aspects, Julie's much more trained in that area than I am.
The public health has regulated fluoride in Kentucky for decades, for as long as I've been in the business, it seems like. And just recently, in the last 5 to 10 years, they have lowered the fluoride limits. And a lot of that is because so many of your dental health products, toothpaste, mouthwashes, fluoride supplements, already have sufficient fluoride. So the levels that are currently in our water are as low as we are allowed to go and stay in compliance with the state public health requirements. Should we stop fluoridating? Ms. Dutton, you had asked about the levels in the Kentucky River. The fluoride levels in the Kentucky River are essentially negligible. If we see any fluoride, it is in a very, very small amount. So we supplement our fluoride dosages. If we stopped, you would end up having to put reliance on your dental health on your different types of dental products that you use. So that's the trade-off. So you have to make sure your children brush. You have to make sure they have some type of fluoride treatment at the dentist instead of relying on it being in your water.
Is that what's prompting this particular legislation? Is that they're getting it from so many other places, or?
No, there is a movement in parts of the country to just stop fluoridating for various reasons. It's
Okay.
just another added chemical that some feel is not necessary.
Okay. Well, so Gary, if you could arrange to get with Julie, get that report, get that information to all the board members and to Catherine. And I think, if it's just basic factual information, I think it's a public record. And if no one has any problems, I think the community needs to hear that information in terms of what our status is and what's going on in our current system.
Sure, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that opportunity. I mean, bottom line is, I know Judy and David, the group did a very good job.
Mhm.
There's a very limit what we can or we cannot do, basically requirement by the government and also all the regulation. So, I mean, one thing I like to say is, I mean, we do have a really high quality water relatively compared to many other utilities. So, I mean, fortunately, we are glad we did. So I will happy to provide information to you, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions about any of the other informational items or any other areas that we want to ask Gary? Okay, with that, we'll go to action items. The first one is consider approving renewal of FPB's insurance policies in the amount of $876,000. And particularly an item, and I know Charlie Hamilton's on here with us, is a question that no board member asked this to be brought up, but what our insurance people identified for discussion is, do we want to raise any of the liability coverage for the board based on the size of the board and so forth. So when this came up, I thought it'd be helpful to have Charlie on here and just advise us what kind of the the state of the industry and our peer groups are doing, so we could have that discussion. So with that, Gary, how do you want to handle this?
I will definitely ask Hans help me.
Okay.
Hans has been handled that for many years, have a lot of institutional knowledge,
Sure.
and I'm happy to Ms. Hamilton can further assist. Hans, I can turn it to you.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Chair and board members. As Mr. Cubine noted in the board digest there, the renewal amount is $876,430. That's an 8.9% increase over last year. The reasons for that increase are outlined in your board digest there. But the biggest driver, of course, in the markets is the COVID issue that's going on. There are some options there to increase the D&O coverage. It's not required that you do so, but there was some benchmarking data that Charlie and his group had provided that the board might want to look at and consider. My experience, of course, you never know until anything occurs, but we've been good with 5 million limits in the past. And so that it might do to kind of keep that in mind, but we could maybe wait till better times and better markets. So with that, I guess I can let Charlie provide a little industry overview for the group if that's what Gary and folks would like to do. Thank you.
Right. Gary, you want to just give us a quick snapshot of what you're seeing in the market and what we ought to consider or be aware of?
Yes. If I think, Hans asked Ms. Hamilton help
Yes.
us
Yes,
went
sir.
through that. There's a many company give us a proposal. Hans, do you want to go to detail, or you want to ask Charlie help us go to detail?
I'll let Charlie kind of discuss some of the steps that they took, and we can go from there.
Well, thank you, members of the board. We have represented the plan board and appreciate it very much for the insurance for years now. And we went to about 18, 19 companies and went through on the insurance. Actually, as Hans mentioned, it's an 8.9% increase. Believe it or not, that's actually less than the average for companies your size. The main two things are actually driving it up from a percentage standpoint were the directors and officers liability and the errors and omissions, the technology errors and omissions and cyber insurance. And those are the things that from a percentage standpoint, kicked it up pretty good. The auto went up pretty good too, but most of that are, a third of that had to do with the number of vehicles. The other was rate change. And we're still seeing inadequate rates the companies are claiming on the automobile side. So that's why you're seeing that. But I do feel one of the things the board may want to consider on the directors and officers is that's from a liability standpoint, those are the lowest limits you're carrying on any coverage is on directors and officers. The benchmarking showed somewhere between 5 and 10 million on utilities your size in the country. You're kind of in between those two, maybe leaning more toward the 10 million, but I think the board decision really boils down to how much you can afford. And if you can afford the additional, it would be very appropriate to provide more protection for the directors and officers. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Charlie, from our experience in terms of claims, the reason for our rates going up to 8.9% overall for all the various insurance lines isn't because we've got an adverse or bad claims history. It's just the market. Is that correct?
It's just the market. It's just the opposite, Mr. Cubine. Your claims experience has been wonderful. And you saw with Kimi when you got a nice dividend because your experience is so good. You have a 57 mod, which is fantastic on the workers' comp. The rest of the insurance is equally good too. You've had wonderful experience. A lot of it's due to Kim and her crew on helping from a loss control standpoint. So the main driver on the increase is the marketplace, and rates does not have to do with you having adverse claims experience.
Okay. Do we have any comments, questions for either Gary, Hans, or Charlie from any board members?
Chair, do we have any proposals if we were to increase the D&O liability percentage or amount, what those premiums increase would look like?
Yes, and I think Hans had it in there. We have a couple of choices that you can do. And one would be increasing the directors and officers liability by itself from 5 to 10 million. The other would be increasing the directors and officers liability and the employment practices liability insurance because they're written together. If you increase the directors and officers liability from 5 to 10 million, the additional annual premium is $36,983. If you increase the directors and officers by 5 million and the employment practices liability by 5 million, the total additional is $47,638.
On the EPLI coverage, where
Yes.
were we as far as industry standard?
Well, you're kind of in between, like on the directors and officers, and that's only being driven by the number of employees when we looked at that. So, I mean, I can't give you an exact answer, but you're between the 5 and 10 million on that too. They don't separate it out between 5 million, 6 million, 7 million, 10 million. They just do 5 million, 10 million, et cetera. The employment practices is pretty important because things like sexual harassment, age discrimination, wrongful termination, the so-called employment practices liability sins, if you will.
But as far as, so those are always written together, the D&O and the EPLI, but I know the D&O, we were at like the 25 to 50% average for coverage for a utility our size. Where are we on the EPLI?
Same thing, because it's being driven on the number of employees.
Okay.
Number of employees is where they're benchmarking on that.
And can we only go up by increments of 5 million?
You can go up whatever increments you want. That's usually the way it's done. You can go 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, whatever above the 5 million. You go 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Usually when you go above 5 million, you go in increments of 5 or 10. But we can do whatever the board prefers.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Sure.
This is actually probably more for David Denton than anybody else. Where does the 899 number fit in with the budget we had for insurance? And if we were to adopt the additional D&O and EPLI, where does that fit in the amount we had for budget for insurance?
Yes, Mr. Schneider. So in our budget, we have this under the administration tab. It is allocated out to all three divisions based on allocation factors. I believe we had budgeted $816,000 for this year. So we definitely have line items in the budget that we are coming under budget on. So I believe that we can find the additional funds. I mean, I can bring up one just of the, travel and training. We aren't doing that except for remote now. So there's ways that you can, I think there's room in the budget. It's just, where do we want to pull it from?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Steve.
I'm sorry.
John.
I got one more. Our workers' comp, is that a completely separate line item, David, or is that included in the rest of the budget for insurance?
So the insurance in the budget does not include the workers' comp amounts. That is pulled as a factor of the payroll.
Okay.
Or it's listed as employee benefits.
Right. Okay. All right.
Hans, maybe you could cover this. Oh, I'm sorry, Steve, you had a question.
Just back to the budget. I know the money for the sale of surplus property that we had talked about a few years ago, that is unbudgeted money, realized revenue that's unbudgeted. And I was wondering, that came into somewhere at the time around 30,000, 40,000, David, I guess.
It varies year to year, and most of that is due to our fleet management policy. You know, we get to a certain point of mileage and depreciation, and we sell those vehicles and then receive the proceeds from that. I could look and see. I've looked at that recently. So there are funds available there as well. So, you know, we could go through and however the board would like to see that moved around, it is there to be had.
David, the 876 figure, just raising the D&O on the board is 36 on employment practice also would take it to 40-some thousand. What's in that? Which one of those, if any, are in that 876 figure, or would that be in addition to the 876?
It's in addition to, it's the additional annual premium to take it from a 5 million limit to a 10 million limit. So it's
So the 876 would become 24, would become about 912, and the other one would take it to about 920 something. Is that correct?
That I have not added up. You're quicker than I am, but I'm going to say it should be.
Yeah. Well, we've got obviously any options the board wants to pursue. One, we could leave it just the way it is and leave the current coverages at 5 million. We could go with the what Charlie has researched in terms of what the market is and go with the 10, or Catherine brought up a good point. We could split the difference like at 7.5 million, which would cut the extra cost some, or any other increment. So that's kind of the three options.
I guess, John, we're assuming that if you went in the increments of whatever, that the increase would be divided about by the 36 and or the 47.
Yeah, I'm assuming that it'd be kind of a prorated amount that probably instead of 36,000 or 47, if you went up 2.5, it'd probably cut that premium by about half, that increased premium. Is that true, Charlie? You're muted.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. The higher you go up, the amount per million drops.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you can't really do 7.5, you can do 7 or 8. They'd use it in increments of 1 million.
Okay.
But if you did that, the higher you go, the more that rate drops. So it wouldn't quite be pro rata.
Okay, and then one other question, maybe Hans or Charlie and Catherine, maybe you could, in this type of coverage, if we went and someone filed a suit against us and we went to court and we lost and had to pay a judgment, then what would be the exclusions to where our insurance wouldn't cover us anyway? If we acted, I know fraud, acting outside color law, outside your scope, what kind of things would mean we didn't have coverage anyway that would cancel our coverage?
I mean, I would have to get the policy and kind of read the exclusions. I can't tell them off the top of my head, but you're basically right, Mr. Cubine. I mean, the whole thing, the directors and officers liability, you might compare, it's like malpractice insurance for the board. Mm-hmm. It's covering things you did that you shouldn't have done or things you didn't do that you should do. Mm-hmm. And it's extremely broad. And I can't, without actually pulling the policy out, just name off the exclusions.
Right.
But the coverage is extremely broad.
Mr. Chair?
Sure. Yes, Catherine.
Would it be appropriate that we go on, obviously, and renew at the renewal at the 876, which is basically keeping our policy as is, and if for next month, kind of get a report on budget, areas in the budget that we could pull from where we were under budget, so we can actually see like how much we could play with without actually going over budget. So like the surplus property amount, what it is, where we are under. I'd kind of like to shop that way to know how much money I have before I'm like going over my budget.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, because if we go with higher amounts, once we do that, that becomes our new base, and that's going to be a reoccurring expenditure in the future. Charlie, if we renewed at the 876, kept our 5 million in place, then if we come back in February, like Ms. Mitchell's proposing, reviewed our budget status, what the impact would be and so forth, could we then amend those coverages at that point?
Yes, you could. That's not a problem. You could turn around and do it in your next board meeting.
Okay. Catherine, do you want to make that as a motion?
Yes. I make a motion that we renew at our current level to the tune of $876, $430, and 26 cents.
And then we revisit next month and ask David to bring us a budgetary report with areas of potential savings to cover both the 8.9% increase up to 876 plus any additional premium.
Yes. So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Do we have any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Motion's adopted. Thanks, Charlie, for joining us on the call.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next one, 7.2. It's the relocation options for old steam pump wheel, piston, and marker currently at the reservoir site. And I'll have to admit, I may have stirred this up. The wheel that everybody knows sits in front of the clubhouse that's been there for years, that's part of the plant board's history in terms of the reservoir and so forth, is going to have to be relocated for some period of time with the construction of the new reservoir. So the question is, when we do that, then do we bring it back to that site or do we take it to an alternative site? And I brought up at the time that, where it is right now, and since we've not been using the clubhouse and with the construction on the reservoir, nobody gets to see that. And did we want to relocate to somewhere where people could see it, since that's part of the plant board's history? And did we want to pursue that? And at this point, I'll turn it over to David Billings to try to explain the mess I made. David?
It's not a mess. You did a good job.
I did a good job messing up, or?
Explaining the item. There are three items. You mentioned the pump and the wheel. The other item is an AWWA marker for the reservoir to celebrate 100 years in service. Staff feels like keeping it at the reservoir side is probably the best location for that. The other two items, the old steam pump wheel and the piston, we reached out to Sean with the Parks and Recreation. He said that Cold Spring Park might be an option. We also looked at possibly different locations there at the admin building, or we can keep them on site. So staff is looking for some direction from the board as to where you would like for us to investigate further.
So we're going to have to, bottom line is, we're going to have to move things out of there regardless of which option we pick. The decision then is, once the reservoir is completed, do we bring everything back there or do we relocate it somewhere else? So basically, we're going to have a cost regardless. But the question is, where's to get relocated to? And I think you all have also looked at some possible sites that it could be located by the new admin building, not the marker, but the piston and the pump wheel. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I can share my screen. I have that up if that would be okay.
Sure.
Let's see. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the locations we discussed with Charmista is where would be a good site up at the admin building. One thing that was brought up is maybe have the pump on one side of the sign out in a circle median and the piston on the other. It was also brought up about possibly putting it along the walkway from the bus stop, sorry about that, down to the, on the way to the admin building. The other locations that I've looked at the existing reservoir site is basically there's a fence right behind the pavement before you, as you're looking at the reservoir. That fence could be, it's being taken down for construction anyway. It'll be put back up after. That fence could be moved back 5 or 10 feet and those items could be placed there as well. That's another option.
Okay. Do we have any idea? They're going to have to be moved for the reservoir construction regardless. And I guess the cost of either putting them back at the reservoir site or putting them at the admin building or somewhere else is probably relatively the same. Is that correct?
I would say so. We're also going to have some cost Those items need to be sandblasted and painted. A portion of both the wheel and the piston is set in concrete, and I don't know what it looks like once we remove the concrete, but I would say there's some severe rust and deterioration ongoing underneath the concrete.
Okay. Okay, with that, open it up for board discussion.
John, we talked about the cold spring. I think it wouldn't be seen that much over there. I mean, I'm good wherever it goes, but I mean, I'm not sure what the traffic is over there. My suggestion would either be in front of the admin building permanently, or put it over there temporarily and bring it back to the new reservoir, because it would add some, what's the word, like some
Character.
character.
There you go.
That's the word.
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely,
The new reservoir.
if we put it at the admin on that area that David showed, by the bus stop, of course, that road has already got the state lab, people traveling to the new Sauer building, to the new Humane Society eventually be back there, Public Service Commission's back there. That's, I guess, a pretty heavily traveled road now.
I just think it might get lost not lost, but forgotten, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Dawn,
I like
John?
the thought of it being there at the admin building, because I think it will be seen by the public more. Depending upon what we do with the clubhouse, people may or may not be going to the reservoir site that often. And on the admin building's property, that gets a lot of traffic and people would really see it there.
Mr. Chairman, I think I'm in agreement with Dawn. I like the admin building as an idea for the permanent home. Cove Spring, like Steve said, not many people see it. And I just think that just gets us into putting something on a park. And I think that's just it's going to raise there's going to be some people that have a problem with that. Mm-hmm. I just think it's just something we can avoid. It's part of our history. I think we display it properly right at our administration building, right next to our sign. I think it does lend some character and some history to who we are as an organization.
Catherine?
I agree with John and Dawn. I like it in the circle area, but I haven't really gone up there and looked, but I do for sure generally like it being up at the administration building. Can somebody describe the AWWA marker?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. The reservoir was put in service built about 1886. In 1986, when it reached 100 years of continued use, the American Waterworks Association recognized it as a historic landmark in municipal waterworks. So that plaque was erected up there about that time.
Does that designation have any restrictions on moving things?
Not that I'm aware of. When we were looking at federal funding for the reservoir, that in itself puts a lot of scrutiny on things, and the Historic Society, all the funding agency reviews that have to go along with a KIA grant, they never mentioned anything of that to that nature.
And as I remember, David, that one is more almost the size of like a cemetery marker or whatever.
Yes, sir.
A brass plate, like on concrete, it's not very tall, is it?
No, sir. It's probably waist high, maybe a little bit higher than waist high.
Has anybody checked with our historic preservation officer to see if there's any issues with moving these things?
I have not.
That might be a good idea. It might be, there might not be anything there, but I think it just might as well check with her.
Why don't we do this, if this is agreeable to everyone? There seems to be a general sense that generally we're interested in moving those items, two of those items to the admin building. And between now and the February meeting, if David, if you would follow up on what Ms. Mitchell said, check with Historic Preservation. And also, this gives the opportunity for y'all to vet those two sites a little more, maybe bring back just maybe a sketch or something, what it might look like. And then also, if anybody else has any comments or whatever, we could have those between now and then, and we could take action, assuming everything else is fine, we could take action in February. How does that sound?
It's good.
Sounds good.
Okay. So do we need a motion on that, Hans, do you think? Or is that just, can we just give instruction to David and Gary and you to pursue that and kind of tie up those ends and bring us back some more information? Or do we need to do something more formal?
No, sir, I think that's sufficient. I think that's, everybody can, knows what the board's looking for, and we'll go out and find it.
Okay, Ms. Poe, that will be on the agenda next month. Okay, so if that's okay with everybody, we'll proceed in that direction. Next is consider approval of construction plans suitable for bidding the reservoir replacement project. Mr. Billings?
Yes, sir. I have also with us Adam Weber with Strand. Subsequent to the landscape committee making their decision, Strand's been working diligently on getting the plans ready to go to bid. Those plans are, I would say, 99.95% complete. They are included in the agenda package on pages 219 to 238. I had originally planned on doing a presentation of the construction plans, but not really a whole lot has changed from what the board has seen previously. It's still 16th dome roof, still has the retaining wall, all those general guidelines that the board gave us direction on before. What's different with these set of plans is they're suitable to go to construction. What you might not have seen is on page 4 with like a demolition plan, more details with the grading and erosion control measures on page 6. A lot of the details that haven't been really developed up to this point. That's really what we're talking about here. So these are plans suitable to send out to potential bidders to get bids on. So we're asking for the board to instruct staff to publicly advertise and take bids on the project.
Do these have to go back to planning and zoning, or are we clear at this point, or do we have anything we need to do with them?
I think we're clear. Hence, do you agree?
Yes, sir. I think we're all set.
Now, I do have to get divisional water approval, and we have to finish up the specifications. So those two issues remain, but as soon as we get those, I feel like we can go to bid.
And the relationship, Dawn, that you've put together with the Tanglewood Neighborhood Association, there's nothing in here that, this includes the landscape plan that was agreed upon, right?
Yes,
Right.
it does.
So there's nothing changing the agreement and what we worked out and the understanding we had with them, the city commission, planning and zoning, all that's still in place.
That's my understanding.
Right.
Okay. Any further discussion? Anybody wants to ask David any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
David, you mentioned divisional water approval. Is that something that's going to take weeks? Is it going to take a month? Is it going to take?
I honestly expected it prior to this. We got divisional water approval for the 7 million gallon tank that we were going to bid earlier. Not really too many questions on that. The only difference between that submittal and this submittal was a 2.5 foot shorter sidewall height. But I've had a couple of conversations with Division of Water, and I expect approval from them any moment.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other discussion, questions? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the plans for bidding, to put out on bid for the reservoir replacement project?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved to proceed with bidding. Thank you, Mr. Billings. Next one is consider approving amendment number 1 with HDR Engineering in the amount of $40,000 for emergency response plan development for the water division. This was something I think came up, I know several months ago, wasn't it, David? And you said this was going to be coming, you'd be bringing this a proposal.
Yes, sir. The 2018 law is in 2 phases. The first step, the first phase was a risk assessment. We had into the end of last year to get that done. We hired HDR to do that, did a great job. We confirmed with the EPA that that was done a few days right before Christmas. The next step is the emergency response plan. We reached out to HDR. We had it in the budget. They came back with a $40,000 amendment to compile the emergency response plan. Staff has recommended the board approve amendment number 1 with HDR.
And the money for this, Mr. Denton?
It's in the budget, David.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We've got this project's in the budget, and we're ready to pull the trigger.
Okay. Okay. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved amendment. Number 7.5, consider budget revisions for T54 and T55 replacement and approved task order with Power Centric Solutions for $169,090.
Good evening, Mr. Keybon, members of the board. A little feedback. Hang on, sorry. Okay, so to go back to August of last year, we had a system fault that resulted in a transformer failure on T55 at Capitol Plaza substation. So we investigated the fault and the damaged equipment and determined the transformer is beyond repair. It's a 1969 model. So the prudent decision, we believe, is to go ahead and replace the transformer. Due to the age of the equipment and forecasted load growth, we expected to begin this project next year. We knew the equipment was old and needed to be replaced, but due to the imminent failure and the need to go ahead and get started on the project, we're asking for a budget amendment to go ahead and move funds up to this current fiscal year and to go ahead and get started on that project right away. So
As I understand it, Travis, this also supports whatever decision ultimately happens in terms of construction development down there on the parcels where the Civic Center formerly was, that this will support whatever construction plans go forth there. Is that correct?
That's correct. This substation feeds basically all of the downtown area, or at least that half of downtown, if you will. All the commercial and industrial customers along Wilkinson are also fed out of this substation. So we know we've got a lot of load growth coming up in the next few years, and we think getting started sooner rather than later is a good idea to go ahead and begin that project now and take on any issues that we think may be coming down the road, go ahead and address those now as well. So instead of just doing an equipment swap out, what our plans currently are is basically to do an entire station renovation, which will include a new transformer, new steel, new relaying equipment, better spill prevention, basically an entire substation renovation, which will include $1 million in expected expenses this year and $2.2 million in expenses next year. And I believe the board has been provided an updated capital budget and a funding summary to show you what that'll look like.
Okay. Do we have any questions of Travis?
Yeah.
Steve? Yes, sir.
Just as a general question, when the city or state plans a major development, which causes us to have to strengthen or upgrade our infrastructure, do they participate? Would they participate in the cost of that upgrade? You know, like when I know when with new sewage or new sewage demands and a major development, do they participate in the cost of our upgrade to accommodate, their needs?
So the approach in general is we try and take a look at how much expected revenue growth is going to be derived from that expansion, and we make a determination on how much will be that developer's burden versus the plant board's burden. So there's a few different avenues that could go down. If it's a residential expansion, a residential development, there are specific terms in the tariff that address that, where we ask the developer to cover some of the costs of that up front. If it's a single customer, but a large customer, generally the approach is that the revenue expected will offset any cost of the plant board. So generally, you know, there are lots of different varieties, obviously, but that's in general the approach is we try and take a look at what's the expected load growth, what's the expected revenue growth, and how much of the capital cost can we offset with that.
But even on the private development of say a new subdivision,
Mhm.
there is an additional revenue that you are going to be receiving from that development, but you're still charging them for the for the cost of the enhanced infrastructure. I'm not saying I'm for that. I'm just saying what your example sounds like it's the same both ways. I mean, you're going to receive new revenue from either venture. And
yeah, I think I see Vin on there. He may be able to help me with the history on that. I think the tariff was structured specifically for residential developments based on probably years of past experience. Maybe Vin can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think when you look specifically at a residential development, it has a specific framework around it that's kind of based on previous experience and sort of changes in the marketplace versus one specific large customer. You can make a little better determination of, what the immediate impact may be. Van, does that?
Yeah, I think a good way to think of this particular project is that this substation transformer is not being replaced just for that new development. It's being replaced because the previous one failed, and we're going to make some upgrades to the station, the protection packages, all the pieces there, because they have really exceeded their useful life. They're old. We want to make some upgrades because of what is coming into that area. If it was one specific customer or one specific load, let's say we had an industrial customer that was large coming in themselves and they required a complete substation rebuild just to serve their load, just to be able to do whatever, we would work with the customer to develop some type of contract where they would pay the appropriate amount as needed to not put that burden on the rest of our customers. In this case, the burden of the cost is recovered in the rates of all the customers. This is part of the normal stuff that's done in that whole area. So all the customers that are using the substation equipment is kind of recovered in their rates. We're not expecting that this transformer is being put in alone just for the development there. It is a factor with the things growing down there, but I don't think there's one particular customer we would identify and try to give that specific cost.
Well, let me ask you this.
We have had. Yes.
Let me ask you this question: If the area down there if this was 6 years ago, everything was still like it was 6 years ago, and you had to do this project now, are you doing more now for this project because it's free? Because it's being developed over there, as opposed to what you would have done if there was no development possibilities over there. In other words, I'm talking about the added responses that we are making down there because we know of the pending development. And if that cost would be subject to participation by the developer of those parcels down there.
If it was 6 years ago, would we have? I think 6 years ago, we were going to move down the road to make a lot of adjustments to the substation. That's why it was in the budget. The failure certainly speeds it up a little bit. In the process of getting in the nuts and bolts of looking at all the details now, we think there's quite a few upgrades that station needs. If the parcels were not being developed at all, but if we still had the Civic Center and those kind of things there, I think we would probably do the same type of upgrades to this substation. Probably, we're making sure that we have a little more capacity and a little more room to be flexible because, we really don't know exactly what's going in that. We are seeing development there. We're also making guesses on if that development is very successful. There's always been a conversation of let's have more development on the riverfront. Let's let's move the YMCA, let's move a lot of those things. And we have to make a guess here and a plan for an item that needs to last at least 35 or 40 years. So 4 or 5 years ago, did we think, I think you said 6 years ago? I don't know. I mean, I don't know that we knew the development was exactly moving along in the way it is in that area. I don't know that I knew they were tearing down the Civic Center at that particular time.
Assuming that there was no potential for any new development over there, would you still build this same substation to the features that you're putting in it now? If there was no potential for development over there at all, which it is 6 years ago.
I don't know. The one thing about the substation, it is right in the middle of our system. So it gives us, we have highways into it from other areas. So if we have a failure in another area, you can transfer the load here. And with its central location, it helps out. I don't know that I can answer that question. Travis, can you answer with if there was going to be zero development period?
Well, that's
Yeah, I
fine.
mean,
That's fine for me. I understand that you're not asking. My point though is that anytime we have the opportunity to allow someone else to supplement our finances, because particularly from a private developer, this is not, I don't think that's a public development down there. Publicly, it's a private development, I think. I may be wrong. And in that respect, you know, the ratepayers should be protected from enhancing someone else's development. But again, that's a statement. I'm not asking for your answer, you know.
Well, Mr. Mason, I think I understand better what you're asking. Yeah, if we thought, and we absolutely try to recover our rates from the person who is creating the expense. And for instance, in those developments, the transformers to serve those individual developments on a much smaller scale, they will be directly for those, and they will participate in those costs to a large degree, as they should. We have built substation equipment in the past directly for a customer, and that customer bore those costs. So I guess I got a little distracted and misunderstood your question a little. If we thought that there was a specific customer that this substation equipment was directly 100% or even a vast majority of it for them, we would try to recover that cost from that customer. That's how our tariff plays out.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Vint or Travis?
Well, Chair, I feel like kind of the punchlines left off of this conversation
Sure.
that Mr. Mason started. So is that something you can do after the fact? Or if that was, in whatever calculation you did, that was something that you thought was appropriate now, would we approach that developer now?
If we had, let's say that in one of those parcels down there, you end up with a customer that needed most of the capacity of this transformer. So it basically needed to be put in for this customer. We would then approach that customer and we would work through their load, because we might even have to have, additional if somebody was going to take all the load out of a transformer from one business. We kind of take them as they come. It depends. Usually the transformers, the transmission system, this kind of bulk power stuff that we're talking about is usually shared across the whole system cost-wise. It's a lot easier when you get down to the individual transformers that serve a load or the individual conductors that serve a load. Those costs are usually directly allocated. We know exactly what it takes. It's just for customer A. Customer A gets a bill about this particular piece of the construction. So if those customers come in, there will be facilities made directly for them that they will directly share in the cost of. Here at this substation level, I don't expect we're going to have an individual customer down there that's going to take up a huge majority of this specific transformer, Travis. Maybe I haven't seen anything.
Miss Cuba, I'm sorry.
Steve?
When could you, I'm sorry, Ms. Mason, can you go ahead? Could you, Travis, let us know basically if we know the developer on the parcel B and C, what's the percentage load on that substation? Is a pretty high percentage? Is relatively smaller percentage? Does that make sense? to
If I had to take a guess at it, I would say probably it's going to be, I would imagine, less than half. I mean, if you picture the entire electric system, things can be pretty dynamic. So load shifts around based on where it's needed and which facilities we need to supply that load. But just looking at this one in particular off the top of my head, basically you're looking at all of Miro, all of that area. There's still quite a bit of downtown that's currently being fed out of this substation. All of Wilkinson, all of that commercial, all of that industrial potentially could be fed out of this substation. Going beyond that,
All the way to Ridgeview, you got Benson Valley.
Yeah, Benson Valley, Bald Knob. So there's
The bigger question though is because of where this substation is located, the fact that it's not overloaded at that particular point, but we have to be ready at any moment to shift the load from the other big substations to the right and the left and further to the center, because it has to be able to absorb the load of those stations to be able to handle most any. So I don't think we're able to say, well, this substation is 95% loaded. It's not in that particular case. I don't think, Travis, unless you know the exact percentage. I don't. But it is dynamic because it's constantly loads being shifted from other places from time to time. And there's 3 bays currently.
If I could, let me just ask one question. Part of this is, we got the issue about capacity, and we had a civic center down there before that used a certain amount of capacity. Part of this is growth. And part of this whole project is we had a part of our system that failed that we need to go in now and replace the equipment on a long-term permanent basis. Is that correct? So the total cost that we're looking at this year and next year, about $3.5 million. A significant part of that, as Steve was asking, if we had no further new development, part of that cost from a long-term basis, because I think you said, Vint, this facility is, would you say 79 or 69?
the transformer that failed is a 69 model.
So this is a 50-year-old piece of equipment that some part of the $3.5 million we've got to spend regardless to basically phase it to replace that equipment. Is that correct?
That's correct. A big part of the cost is just to get us back to where we were operating before. Of course, as everyone understands, between COVID and all those other factors, the load has been down. We're not necessarily in a bind as we are right now today. We've been able to switch things around and meet all the customer needs. But I guess the intent there, bringing up all the upcoming load growth is more, the intent was to speak to the necessity to take on some of these improvements now, as opposed to waiting when we could potentially be in some kind of load growth bind. If 5 or 6 years down the road, we do see that expected load growth, we're going to lose a lot of flexibility. So I think that was the intent there, to speak to the need to start right away, I guess is where we were trying to go with that.
So I guess going back to Steve's question, of the $3.5 million we're going to spend on this project this year and next year, how much of that $3.5 million is to cover the incremental power needs growth above what we currently have in that facility or that system right now that's down there in that substation?
I think all of the improvements that are covered in that cost, we would want to do at some point in the near future, maybe not necessarily immediately. These are all improvements that we would want to take on at some point. There's improvements to switching capabilities, relaying, spill prevention. The steel structures are older. We wanted to go ahead and tackle those. So while perhaps we could maybe delay some of the improvements, the recommendation is to try and take them on now, as opposed to, I guess maybe you could say we could kick that can down the road, but we just don't think that's the best idea, all things considered.
Okay.
Travis, let me ask you, Vint, do we need a board action for this month, or do you think we might need more time to prepare ourselves to answer all the board's questions, or even looking for potential possibility if someone else help us to those funding.
Mr. Gary, if you could, let me defer to Steve. Steve, do you want, first, like you said, do we have to act this month? And two, Steve, do you feel like you've gotten the information you need, or is the sense of the board, you want some more information and then revisit this in February?
Well, I'll defer to the board, the collective board, but my point was that if some of the costs that we're incurring here is a direct result of we knowing that the process A and those processes are being developed by one person, one owner, one entity, then should we be exploring, talking to the city or to that developer about the participation of that cost? Because that cost would not be there if they weren't developing the property. That's how it was using when it was fully developed 6 years ago. Would we have been, what in this project would we have not done? Would we not do if it was fully developed like 6 years ago? Again, I'll defer to whatever the board wants, and I'll go, I'm fine with that. I was just raising the point.
Sure.
About trying to reduce our costs where it's legitimately possible to do it, and that's all.
Let me ask this, Travis or Vint, if we were, with the way things stand right there, right now, today, down there, given the equipment failure we had and the need to take some action, remedial action, to replace that substation, regardless of what happens on that property, and we weren't going to add any additional capacity, how much of that $3.5 million would we be saving? Or would, in essence, that $3.5 million still be the cost, whether anything goes on that parcel or not?
I think the 3.5, the vast majority of it, it really needs to be spent to prepare that area for whatever future development you have. We know that there is some coming. We don't know exactly what it is, and we don't know exactly what the load is because it's still too preliminary. I think we're going to have to spend the money there. We have lost 1/3 of that station's capability because of the failure. I'm uncomfortable going. If we decide we're not going to try to add these additional capabilities, then we need to go ahead and buy and just put back what we have. Some of that will have to be torn out pretty soon as we go down the road. I think we were trying to prepare for the next steps. We were trying to prepare this asset for the next 50 years of use. But if the board's uncomfortable with the amount of money and uncomfortable doing that, you know, we can just put in what's there, and as the area grows, then we can move transformers out and make other adjustments as we go.
Is from a cost-effective standpoint, is it more cost-effective to do it all now? And with the amount we could maybe bill someone like Steve was talking about incrementally, offset that cost of delaying it? Or is the most economical way to do it right now and then have that in place for the future, regardless of what happens down there? I'm just kind of asking the question.
And I wasn't proposing an incremental, John. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm just merely asking if some of this cost is the result of anticipating the development, then why aren't we talking to the developer about anticipation? Just as if you would, if the sewer lines were being built through there and the water lines were being built through a subdivision or whatever, if we go in and do it, I assume we ask, you know, the Tiger Grant. We're being paid money for our participation in that, and this, in a sense, is somewhat the same kind of a project, only on a private sector basis. But I'm not asking for anything, and I'm fine to go along with this right now if the board wants to do that. I just merely asked a question about the potential for saving money for your ratepayers if it's possible, and if we have considered doing that. So that's really my
yeah. Dawn?
I don't think the city even knows what's going to be going on partial B and C. So for us to be able to project, to be able to get money from whoever develops it, I don't see the point in us holding off on infrastructure improvement that needs to be done. I mean, we're talking, 50-year-old equipment that's already failed. I don't see the point in holding off on that when who knows what the city's going to do with those parcels and what it's going to end up there. From what, if I've understood what Travis and Bent have said, that substation needs to be improved to be able to handle what is going on currently.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the point is, you know, a small percentage, I mean, I don't know, I would guess if you fully develop parcels A and B and all those kind of things, with, you know, that might be maybe 10% of this transformer's load, but all the other things are developing there. The general trend in that area is increased development, not decreased development. It's certainly, even though a lot of stuff has been torn down, it has kind of paved that way, and we see parks and, you know, possibly a new Y and all those things that we're seeing. If you're giving us this crystal ball in 50 years, we think the load in the area will increase. Again, I don't think that we allocate the cost for this substation and the transmission lines that get to it and all the other pieces through our normal rates that our customers will receive. There is not a specific new load that I would be comfortable giving that customer specific cost to this substation, because that's not the way we've treated our other customers. They're recovering the costs of the substation to feed them all in the transmission lines through their rates. But there's just not a very specific, we're going to have to do these upgrades at some point in the next few years, just because of the age of that substation. So it's clearly an area that is developing in a positive upward trend. So I guess what we were trying to get across is this is not an area where it's dwindling away. Why spend the money there? We're just trying to show that, you know, this is an area that's growing, it's increasing, there's new development coming. It is important to continue to upgrade this substation and add on to it. Again, we have already lost 1/3 of the capacity of that substation. We're able to keep it going right now, obviously, but if we don't do something when summer loads and different things hit, if we had another failure, again, this is a central hub. If we had another failure, things would start to get pretty tight. So, you know, I mean, we can go bare bones and we can not prepare for the future. I don't think that would be a prudent thing to do at this particular time. If we have one new customer or two new customers coming in parcels A and B, and they're going to use up 75% of that transformer, you know, that's a different situation. Then you're talking about maybe a special contract with that customer, but that is fairly rare to run into. That's more of a type of thing you would see from an industrial load. But all those customers down there add to it. You know, there's new hotel developments possibly down there. All the different things we see, that area is growing. All of them together are going to use up a lot of capacity, not just one particular one.
Okay, Catherine, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, it sounds like to me from the other people's comments, other members' comments, that we're not questioning this plan. Actually, I mean, I think we should be proud that we're being proactive, that you all have thought to be proactive, and that we're supporting our community and its future growth. And it sounds like it's financially the smart idea to do the upgrades now. I mean, I think the plan sounds good. I think some of us were just wondering if there's if the new developer should be helping. But it sounds like what you just said is, should they, whatever they end up building down there, end up taking, you know, whatever a percent of the load, at that point, through a contract, we could, in essence, get them to pay their share. Is that correct?
That's correct, but it would need to be a significant share and make a huge difference, in my opinion, or else we would not be treating these customers the way we treat other customers.
Okay.
If someone comes in and you basically build a substation for their load use, then yes, they incur those costs. If they're a small percentage of that substation, they bear the cost through their normal rates, which are set to recover that over the life of the asset. And that's how I can't see any of the development there being to such of just parcels A and B being to such a degree that we would do something different there based on the way I've seen us normally allocate costs. Of course, if they came in with a huge load, we would absolutely would do something different.
Okay, and
I
I
just
think
don't
that's
think
just
that's
the, I think that's the assurance some of us wanted, that, you know, and we definitely don't want to deter this development. But if in the future it would be fair to do a special contract, I mean, you're not really anticipating it, but yeah, we don't know what's going in there. But so anyway, I think you've answered my question. I feel comfortable with this proactive project.
Do you have Dawn, Catherine, Steve, John? Does anybody want to make a motion at this point?
Mr. Chairman, I've got one thing to say, and
Yes, sir.
I think it's kind of been glossed over here. You've got two huge state buildings that's served by that substation that have been sitting almost completely empty to a large part over the last 9 months, and that's not going to be the same way forever. So
Correct.
I don't know if it, and you know, I kind of agree with what Catherine just said. We've got the option to, if it turns out we've got somebody that's going to take a huge part of this substation, we can negotiate terms with them whenever they need it. But right now, as Dawn said, I don't even know if the developer has an idea of what's going on in there. So as far as that's concerned, I'd just like to go ahead and make a motion. I think this is something that needs to be done. I think we need to, while we've kind of got put in this situation, and instead of just kind of fixing it halfway, I think we need to go all the way. I'd like to approve the budget amendment and the procedure with the construction of the new substation.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Do we have any discussion? Okay, at this point, on this one, Kathy, you want to call the roll?
Yes, sir, I will. Member Mason?
Aye.
Member Dutton Mitchell?
Yes.
Member Snyder?
Yes.
Member Hale?
Yes.
Member Cuban?
Yes. Budget amendments approved. Item 7.6, consider award of bid invitation 1707 for one automated meter test platform to Radian Research Inc. in the amount of $40,120.
Yes, sir, Mr. Cuban, that one's mine as well.
Yes, sir.
This is I guess what you would call a standard equipment purchase. We'd like to go ahead and replace and upgrade our existing meter testing system. We'd like to go ahead and do that now while we're in the process of implementing and installing an upcoming AMI system. So again, it's another standard equipment bid. We only received one bid for this item, which is probably not a surprise due to the specialty nature of the equipment. But we feel like we've got a good bid, a good piece of equipment at what we believe to be a good price.
And you anticipated this in the budget that we were going to have to be buying this, didn't you? Is that correct?
That's correct. It's part of that $1.4 million AMI line item for this year.
Okay. Do we have any questions of Travis on this? Okay. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion's approved. Next item, and it wouldn't be the same unless we had a bunch of items for Harvey to talk about. So Harvey, you want to start with item 7.7, which is consider approving, is it Reelz renewal?
Reelz.
Reelz?
Yes,
Reelz?
Reelz. Yes. Thank
Okay,
you, Mr.
Reelz.
Chairman. Members of the board, one of these months, you won't see me on this. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
No, we're going to see you every month. No.
Staff recommends approval of the Reelz renewal. This is an NCTC agreement with a term through December 31st of 2023. It's available on channel 100 on the optional preferred tier. It is the 10th most watched network on preferred cable. We've carried Reelz since 2012, and the rate reset and annual increases are below budgeted numbers. No additional carriage requirements or obligations are included in this agreement. The staff attorney has reviewed the agreement and meets with his approval. I'd be happy to answer any questions about this item.
Any questions of Harvey? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Approved. Item 7.8, consider approving Fox College sports renewal. Harvey?
Thank you, sir. This NCTC agreement has a term through December 31st of 2023. The rate in 2021 remains the same as last year's rate. Year over year increases after that are just over 2% annually. The increases were anticipated and no increase on the Sports Plus rate will be required. Fox College Sports is available on the optional Sports Plus tier and is comprised of 3 regionalized services, each of which is a 24-hour per day channel. Fox College Sports is actually owned by Sinclair Media, the company that also owns Tennis Channel. We're still in negotiations with Sinclair for a relaunch of Tennis Channel on preferred cable. And because of that, staff would recommend approval of this Fox College Sports renewal contingent on the completion of negotiations with Sinclair for the relaunch of Tennis Channel on preferred cable, if that is amenable to you guys.
And we've done this, I think, once before, haven't we, Harvey?
Yes, sir.
What would be the contingency? Would be what on the cost side? What are you anticipating?
Well, essentially, we're looking for the rights to relaunch Tennis Channel on preferred cable, and assuming we get that agreement from Sinclair, we would go ahead and submit assuming you guys approve the renewal for Fox College Sports, we would do that at the same time. If we were unable to come to an agreement, or if Tennis was unwilling to allow us to relaunch Tennis Channel on preferred cable, I think we would hold back the renewal on Fox College Sports and then continue to work with Sinclair to get them to agree to that launch.
The reason what I was asked about, are there any budgetary constraints on the contingency approval within the existing terms or within a budget increase, or what's the?
No, and again, we're not really looking for financial. It's really just about the placement of the channel that we're looking for the flexibility to relaunch on preferred. So it's not a financial push on our end. And so as far as this agreement, it is what it is. It's the NCTC agreement, and we're either yes or no. And so we're just waiting for Sinclair to agree on the Tennis Channel, and then we would move forward with the Fox College. Basically just trying to hold back, if this could help us get the right terms on Tennis Channel, or hold back the execution of this agreement until we got that piece in place.
Okay, does anybody have any questions of Harvey on this? Okay, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? Approve the motion with the contingency in it. Thanks, Harvey.
Thank you.
The last one is consider appointing staff as a legally authorized officer for the express purpose of executing MobiTV distribution amendments for program agreements. And as I understand it, where this came up, and correct me if I'm wrong, Harvey and Hans, we expect in relatively short order as many as 12 different sub-agreements that you're going to have to execute for purposes of implementing the mobile distribution. And I think, Hans, didn't you prepare a motion on this?
Yes, sir.
Would you want to read that?
Yes, sir. The motion is the last paragraph of the item 7.9, and it says, staff asks that the board move to approve Gary Zing as the board's authorized agent to sign amendments to programmer agreements that authorize distribution on Mobi. The general manager shall notify the board upon execution of any such amendment, and the amendment shall not change any material terms of the existing programmer agreement, except that the general manager may approve up to an additional $500 annually for costs associated with the Mobi platform. The $500 was just sort of a general idea about. I think someone in the agenda meeting had said, well, what if there's $100 charge? Do we have to bring this? Do we have to bring this back? So I had thought maybe $500, but with the exception of that 500, the board can, the board can say, you can make it $50 or $10 or whatever the board prefers to do with that.
Do we want to let Gary spend $500? Harvey, do you have anything to add to that in terms of what's coming up with these possibly up to 12 amendments and why this will occur?
No, and like I said, I really don't anticipate any financial compensation going to be required in any of these amendments. They're pretty straightforward, just distribution, just basically laying out some requirements on Mobi's behalf more than anything. And so mostly they're just straightforward. And so we appreciate y'all's willingness to work with us on the timing of this.
Okay. Any questions of Harvey? Okay. Seeing none, do we have a motion for the motion that Hans read?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion's approved. Next one is approved Cable Advisory Committee appointment. Who's going to handle this? Harvey?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. We're asking the board tonight to appoint Mr. Trey Greenwell to the Cable Advisory Committee with a term beginning January 20th, 2021 through January 19th of 2024. The appointment is needed to fill a vacancy created by the expiration of Mr. Eric Hockley's term. Staff advertised the opening of the volunteer position in the State Journal, on the FPB website, Facebook and Twitter pages. It was also advertised on Cable 10 bulletin board and on Around 10. A copy of Mr. Greenwell's resume and letter of interest is included for your review. There's still one additional vacancy on the committee. Staff anticipates bringing another appointment for the board to consider next month. We'd also like to just take a second to recognize Eric Hockley's service to the Cable Advisory Committee. He served from 2014 to 2020, was elected chairman of the committee in June of 2019, and served as chair until his retirement in September. We appreciate his service and his contribution to the FPB and this community. Happy to answer any questions on this item.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Harvey?
Chair,
Kevin?
I'm just curious if we had any other volunteers. I'm just curious.
I think we received three applications, letters of interest. Yeah, we're going to continue to solicit some more, like I said, to bring the last recommendation. We try to keep a diverse committee, both geographically, east and west side of town, and from a gender standpoint, just for what we've done. And so I think, to be honest, we'd like a female committee member in this next appointment. So continue to solicit and ask for those applications.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to nominate approval of Trey Greenwell to sit on the Cable Advisory Committee.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? Mr. Greenwell's appointed. Thanks, Harvey.
Thank you.
Number 711. These are your favorites, Steve, because you'll get to run the hearing. Action item, consider approving public hearing notice covering increasing rate for retrans surcharge, which is what we pay the local channels in Louisville and Lexington, increasing rate for cable network pass-through fee, and increasing rate for bulk cable 1 and bulk cable 2. Let's see, my screen went. Bulk cable 2 and 4, reducing rate for HBO Max. And I think it's important to point out all these that we're looking at and holding the public hearing, all these are basically pass-through fees. None of these reflect any increased revenue for the plant board. Whatever we collect on these rates, in fact, would have to go and be passed through to whoever the appropriate entity was. Is that correct, Harvey?
Yes, sir. If you recall, last year, the board approved a new layout on the customer bill to increase transparency on the classic cable charges. And so because of that, as we move forward this year, what we're asking for, besides the Retrans Surcharge, is this cable network pass-through fee. And so again, yeah, the Retrans Surcharge has always been a straight pass-through. And so that is, as we've completed these agreements for the local broadcast channels, the ABCs, CBSs, NBCs, and Fox back in December, this is for to pay for those. Essentially, it's a direct pass-through of these fees to our customers. And unfortunately, the local broadcasters require these channels to be distributed to every single cable customer. So there's no ability for a la carte carriage. And the public notice proposes to establish the Retrans Surcharge at $22.39 per month, effective April 1st, 2021. And then for the next 2 years, because those agreements have all been executed, January 1st, 2022 at $24.78 and January 1st, 2023 at $27.25. Again, like you said, those are direct pass-throughs on what those channels charge FPB to distribute the networks.
Harvey, do you want to explain what bulk cable 1 and bulk cable 2 is?
Sure. So bulk cable 1 is defined in the FPB tariff as typically including hotels and dormitories. And so because they're sort of part-time residences, there's a special rate that we can charge. And so, but it is essentially a ratio or, a percentage of what our full cost is. And then we remit to the programmers the percentage of the number of, people that they represent essentially. So the bulk cable 1 is being proposed to raise to $14.80, and bulk cable 2, which is generally office complexes with more than 8 outlets, increasing to $25.81. And those percentage increases match the percentages that basically Retrans and the network combined increases are. And
I guess one of the things that comes up with this is, for the board, we need to schedule the hearing, and do we want to have a special meeting or do the hearing at the February meeting? And I think, Harvey, what's your all's feelings on that?
I mean, it's up to the board. I mean, I think often we've done this in a special meeting in between the 2 regular meetings. We need 30 days notice to notify our customers of the new rates. And then when we start charging, we're essentially charging a month in advance. So even if this was approved at the February meeting, I would say that it would start showing up in bills in March for services that basically begin in April. That would be the soonest that we could do it. Mm-hmm. And so if you guys waited to do it in February and then approve it in March, then we would be looking at the bills that went out in April, services that begin, for May 1st. So it's whatever the pleasure of the board is, how you guys would like to do it.
What's the board's preference on whether to have a special meeting or have the hearing at the same time as part of the February board meeting?
I think at the same time.
Do it at the February meeting.
Yeah, that's fine.
John, Steve?
Yeah, I'm good with the February meeting.
Steve? You're muted.
I'm good with that. I'm the same.
Okay. So basically, what action do we need to take here, Harvey or Hans? We need to approve holding a public hearing at the February board meeting. Is that would be what we'd be looking at here?
Yes, sir. Just basically, approving the public hearing notice that we would then, put in the paper and put in all the different places so that folks know what's included in, the changes that we're proposing and when that public meeting is going to be held.
So the action item is to schedule a public hearing at the February regular, well, it won't be our regular, at the February special board meeting for consideration to take public comments on these, schedule this to explain and take public comments on the rate. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Those opposed? Motion's approved to hold the public hearing at the February board meeting. Item 7.12, convene ethics committee meeting. Hans, you want to describe this?
Yes, sir. Last year, as everyone is aware, the board updated its ethics policy and made appointments to its ethics committee. And we just like to ask that the board authorize us to call a meeting of the ethics committee to address their organizational matters and to review the financial disclosure forms.
Okay. And the financial disclosure forms are being distributed or have been distributed to all the appropriate board and management staff. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion's approved. Next, item 7.13, consider coronavirus relief provisions for dependent care account. Nichelle,
Good evening.
how you doing?
Good. And board members, staff asked the board to consider an amendment to the FPB Employee Flexible Spending Account and Dependent Care Account Plan. The FSA plan allows eligible employees to contribute pre-tax income to create a special reimbursement account in order to reimburse themselves on a pre-tax basis for payment of certain medical and other outlying IRS Section 2013 expenses. The DCAP also allows eligible employees to contribute pre-tax income in order to reimburse themselves for dependent care expenses as outlined in the Schedule B of the Flexible Benefit Plan document located in the detailed pages. The House of Representatives and the Senate passed the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 on December 21st, 2020, and the President signed on December 27, 2020. In the act, there are temporary provisions relating to health flexible spending accounts and dependent care account plans. The act allows employers to amend their FSA and DCAP plans to provide for a carryover of unused health care and dependent care money from 2020 to 2021 and from 2021 to 2022. FPB currently allows carryover of unused FSA funds of $500 to the next FSA plan year with restrictions. However, FPB does not allow carryover funds for the DCAP plan. Staff asked the board to allow 100% of unused employee funds for carryover for the DCAP plan. By allowing carryover of employees' DCAP funds of plan years ending in 2021 and 2022 will eliminate any loss of funds employees were unable to request reimbursement due to dependent childcare unavailability as a result of the coronavirus outbreak. The temporary legislation also permits grace periods that are more expansive for DCAPs for plan years ending in 2021 and 2022. The legislation specifically permits DCAPs to reimburse an individual after they are no longer an active participant in the plan. The law also allows employers to raise the last eligible age for child's dependent care to 14 from 13 for the 2020 plan year. Staff also asked the board to allow adding those provisions to the DCAP plan. The DCAP provisions in the act are not requirements for the DCAP plan, but temporary plan options that the plan sponsor may implement for the 2021 and 2022 plan years. There is no additional cost to FPB to implement these changes. I can answer any questions you may have.
Do we have any questions for Nichelle? This is basically just allowing employees to get access to their own money. Is that correct?
Correct, for the dependent care plan.
Yes.
Yes.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion's approved. Thanks, Nichelle.
Thank you.
Next item is I'd like to request permission to call a closed session pursuant to KRS 61.8101C to discuss pending litigation regarding a contractor, subcontractor claims and potential action. Do we have a motion?
So
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We had a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We're going into closed session. To return to open session,
So moved.
do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Right? We have no action to take as regarding the closed door discussion. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. I didn't think we were going to get to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment say aye.
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 Those opposed? We're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.